The restaurant always smelled like freshly baked bread and roasted herbs. The sound of soft music floated in the air, mixing with the clinking of glasses and the quiet hum of conversations. In the middle of it all moved a young waitress, calm and graceful, carrying trays with care as if they were made of glass. She had been working there for almost 2 years, ever since she left her small town to find work in the city. Every evening was the same. Guests in fancy clothes, laughing and talking as they enjoyed the candlelight dinner. To them, she was invisible, just another face among the staff, someone who filled their glasses and smiled politely. She never complained. She just did her job quietly, always making sure everything was perfect on the table. But whenever she had a chance, her eyes would drift to the corner of the room where the black grand piano stood. The pianist, an older man with silver hair, played soft tunes that gave the restaurant its charm. Every note seemed to move through her heart. She could never explain it, but music spoke to her in a way words never could. When she was younger, she used to sit for hours at her old upright piano at home, playing until her fingers hurt. Her mother used to say that when she played, the whole house felt alive. But that was before life changed, before her father passed away and bills started piling up. When her mother fell ill, she had to stop everything and find work. Music became something she listened to, not something she played. Still, the love for it never left her. Even after long shifts when her feet ached, she would stay behind a little longer, pretending to clean near the piano just to watch the pianist play. She studied his movements, his timing, the way his fingers danced across the keys. Sometimes, when the restaurant was empty and quiet, she would softly press a key or two, just to feel the sound again. Her coworkers noticed, of course. Some of them teased her gently. "You really like that piano, don't you?" one of them said with a smirk. Another laughed. "Maybe one day you'll play for the guests instead of serving them." She would just smile and shake her head. "I just love the sound of it," she'd reply and return to her work. In truth, she missed the feeling of playing more than anything. She missed the way music allowed her to escape, how it could express everything she couldn't say out loud. But she had made peace with her life. Dreams were for people who had time and money. For her, the world had become about responsibility, keeping her job, paying rent, sending money to her mother. Then one afternoon, the manager announced something that stirred excitement through the entire staff. The hotel was hosting its annual charity gala, a grand event that brought in the city's wealthiest guests. It was the most important night of the year. Everyone had to be on their best behavior. The restaurant would be turned into a ballroom, filled with lights, flowers, and elegant music. For the staff, it meant long hours and extra pressure. For her, it meant one thing: she would get to hear more music than ever before. The gala always had live performances, sometimes a quartet, sometimes a solo pianist. That year, they had invited a well-known musician, someone who often performed for the elite. The week leading up to the gala was exhausting. The staff worked late into the night decorating the hall, polishing every piece of silverware and making sure the chandeliers sparkled. Still, the young waitress didn't mind. There was a quiet happiness in her heart knowing she would get to experience a night filled with music again. On the evening of the event, everything looked magical. The room glowed under golden light with tables draped in white linen and crystal glasses neatly arranged. The guests arrived in gowns and tuxedos, laughter echoing through the room as cameras flashed. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, careful and efficient, making sure every guest was comfortable. The pianist for the night arrived early, tuning the grand piano and testing the sound. She stood a few steps away, pretending to arrange napkins, but her eyes never left his hands. The way he moved was confident and effortless. She couldn't help but imagine how it must feel to play like that again, to have everyone listening, feeling every emotion you poured into the keys. But that thought quickly faded as she carried on with her duties. It wasn't her world anymore. She reminded herself of that as she passed the tables filled with expensive perfume and diamond jewelry. These people lived differently. They belonged to a life far from hers. During a short break, she stood by the service station, sipping water and watching the pianist begin his first set. The melody was slow and full of emotion. A couple on the dance floor swayed gently, eyes closed. She smiled quietly. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream. What if, just once, she could be the one sitting there playing something beautiful? Her thoughts were interrupted by one of the waiters. "You really love that piano, huh?" he said, grinning. Maybe you should take over when he's tired." The others laughed. She laughed too. Even though a tiny part of her heart ached at the joke, they didn't know how true that wish was. When the night ended, she helped clean the hall. The pianist had already left, and the piano sat alone under the soft light. She walked over, running her fingers lightly across the keys. The sound was faint but clear. She pressed another note, then another, and soon a small melody filled the empty room. Her eyes closed for a second. It felt like coming home. But before she could play more, the manager walked in. She quickly pulled her hand away, embarrassed. "You should be careful," he said, though his tone wasn't angry. "That piano costs more than your yearly salary." She nodded apologetically. "Sorry, sir. I was just checking if it was closed properly." He gave her a small smile, then left. When she got home that night, she couldn't sleep. The image of the piano and the sound of its keys kept playing in her mind. She thought about her childhood lessons, about her teacher's words. "You have a gift. Never stop using it." But life had other plans. Still, something about that night stirred something deep inside her. Maybe that gift wasn't gone. Maybe it was just waiting. The next morning, everyone at the restaurant buzzed about how successful the event had been. The guests had loved the food, the music, everything. The manager was pleased. But as fate would have it, an unexpected problem arrived that very afternoon. The hotel's regular pianist, the one who played every evening, called in sick. He wouldn't be back for at least a week. The manager frowned. "We'll need to find someone to fill in," he said. "We can't have dinner service without music." He started calling around, trying to book a replacement. But every pianist he knew was either busy or too expensive on short notice. The tension in the room grew. That's when one of the waiters, half-jokingly, said, "Why not let her play? She's always staring at that piano anyway." Everyone laughed. The young woman's face turned red, but she stayed quiet. The manager looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "You play?" he asked. She hesitated. "A little," she replied softly. "Really?" he said, surprised. "Classical, modern?" She looked down. "Mostly classical. I used to study, but I haven't played in a while." The others chuckled. "Oh, come on," one said. "We're not running a concert hall. Just play something simple if you know how." The manager sighed. "Fine, play something short. If it sounds decent, we'll let you cover tonight until I find someone." The staff watched as she walked toward the piano, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. Her heart raced. It had been years since she played seriously. What if she messed up? What if they laughed again? She sat down slowly, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. For a moment, she didn't move. The restaurant was quiet, everyone waiting. Then she pressed the first key. A soft, familiar sound filled the air. Her hands began to move, shaky at first, then smoother, more certain. The melody grew stronger, filled with warmth and life. The staff, who expected a few clumsy notes, stared in silence. The air changed. The sound was no longer just music, it was emotion, memory, something pure. When she finished, no one spoke for a few seconds. The manager's face softened. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. She looked down, her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she whispered. From that day on, everything in the restaurant began to feel different. Not just for her, but for everyone who heard her play. The next evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. Word had spread among the regular guests that something special had happened the night before. No one had said much, but the staff whispered quietly about the waitress who had played the piano like a professional. When she arrived for her shift, she tried to act normal. Her uniform was neatly ironed, and her hair tied back as always. Yet inside, she felt different. For the first time in years, she had touched the piano again, and the feeling had stayed with her all night. It was as if something she'd buried deep inside had woken up. The manager approached her before dinner service began. "You can play again tonight," he said, glancing at the empty piano. "Until our regular pianist returns. Just keep it soft and pleasant for the guests." She nodded, trying to hide her excitement. "Of course, sir," she said. As the lights dimmed and the first guest entered, she took her seat at the piano. Her hands trembled a little, but once she began to play, the nerves faded away. The music flowed like water, gentle and steady. Conversations continued, glasses clinked, and the sound of her music blended perfectly into the warm atmosphere of the room. Some guests didn't even realize it was her at first. When they did, their eyes widened in surprise. "Isn't that one of the waitresses?" someone whispered. She plays beautifully. Another nodded, smiling. She's better than the regular guy. By the end of the night, the restaurant was filled with a calm, peaceful energy. Even the kitchen staff noticed it. The head chef, usually short-tempered, worked in an unusually good mood. The waiters moved faster but spoke softer. Something about her music made everything feel lighter. When her shift ended, the manager stopped her before she left. "Good work tonight," he said simply. "Keep playing until further notice." His tone was still professional, but there was respect in his eyes now. At home, she couldn't stop smiling. For years, she had believed that part of her life was over, but now, every evening, she was allowed to play again. It wasn't a concert hall, but it didn't matter. Each note she played made her feel alive again. Days passed, and her playing became the soul of the restaurant. People began to request songs. Some regular guests started arriving earlier just to listen. Even those who once ignored her now greeted her kindly. But not everyone was kind. A few of her coworkers started making sly comments. One of the senior waiters, who never liked being outshined, muttered one night, "Looks like you're everyone's favorite now, huh? Guess the rest of us should learn piano too." She didn't reply. She just smiled politely and focused on her work. Deep down, she didn't play for attention. She played because she couldn't help it. The piano was her way of breathing again. A week later, the manager announced something that made her heart race. The hotel's grand charity gala, the biggest event of the year, was only a few days away. Hundreds of guests were expected, including businessmen, celebrities, and local leaders. The pianist originally hired for the event had fallen ill, and the manager was struggling to find a replacement on short notice. "We need someone who can handle the pressure," he said, frowning as he looked at the staff gathered around. "The music is a key part of the evening. Without it, the entire event will fall flat." One of the waiters chuckled and pointed at her. "Why not let her play? She's already the talk of the restaurant. Let's make her famous." Everyone laughed. Even the manager gave a small grin. "Very funny," he said. But then he paused, his eyes thoughtful. "Actually," she froze. "Sir?" she asked quietly. He looked at her. "Could you handle something like that? It's a high-class event. Important guests, media, the works. It's not like playing during dinner service." She hesitated. I don't know," she said honestly. "You're talented," he said. "Everyone can see that. But this is different. If you can do it, you'll help us a lot." Her heart pounded. The idea of performing at such an event terrified her. But at the same time, it filled her with a spark she hadn't felt in years. "I'll try," she said softly. The manager nodded. "Good. You'll have 2 days to practice. Use the piano in the hall whenever you need." That night after closing, she stayed behind. The lights were dim and the room was silent except for her soft footsteps as she walked toward the piano. She sat down and touched the keys gently. The cool surface felt familiar, like greeting an old friend. She began to play one of the pieces she used to practice years ago, a classical composition she had learned when she was still a student. Her fingers stumbled at first, rusty from the long break, but soon they remembered the rhythm. The notes rose and fell, echoing through the empty hall. As she played, memories flooded back. The sound of her teacher's voice, her mother listening from the kitchen, the applause at her first recital. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't stop. The music carried everything she felt, the years of silence, the struggles, the small moments of hope. She didn't know the manager had stayed behind, watching quietly from the doorway. When she finally finished, he clapped softly. She turned around, startled. "That was beautiful," he said. "If you play like that at the gala, everyone will be speechless." Her cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she whispered. Over the next 2 days, she practiced whenever she could. Even during short breaks, she'd sit at the piano, going over melodies and transitions. The other staff members began to gather around, listening silently. Some of them started cheering her on. "You'll blow them away," one said. "Don't forget us when you become famous," another joked. She laughed shyly, though the thought of playing in front of so many people still scared her. She wasn't used to attention. She had spent most of her life blending in, not standing out. The night before the gala, she went home early to rest, but sleep refused to come. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led her here. The long shifts, the teasing, the loneliness. Maybe life was finally giving her a chance to show who she really was. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with excitement. The staff rushed around with flowers, decorations, and trays of expensive wine. She arrived in her uniform, but the manager stopped her. "Not tonight," he said, handing her a long black dress. "You're not a waitress for this event. You're the pianist." Her breath caught in her throat. "Sir, this is too much." "Take it," he insisted gently. "You've earned it." She went to the dressing room and slipped into the gown. It was simple yet elegant, and for the first time in a long while, she saw herself differently in the mirror. Not as a worker in the background, but as someone meant to be seen. When the evening came, the grand hall sparkled under golden lights. The guests arrived one by one, dressed in luxury and confidence. Laughter echoed as photographers took pictures. The tables shimmered with crystal glasses and silver plates. She stood near the piano, her hands clasped together, trying to steady her breathing. She could hear her heartbeat louder than the crowd's voices. The manager gave her a reassuring nod from across the room. When it was time, she walked slowly to the piano. Conversations began to fade as people noticed her. Some recognized her as the waitress who served them nights before and whispered in disbelief. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. For a brief moment, she looked at the crowd, then closed her eyes. The room fell completely silent. The first notes drifted out, soft, delicate, but full of emotion. Her fingers moved with grace, every sound wrapping the room in warmth. As the melody built, the audience leaned in, drawn by something they didn't expect to find in a hotel ballroom. She forgot about the people, the lights, the whispers. There was only her and the music, the same comfort that had carried her through every hard day. Each note told a story of loss, love, hope, and quiet strength. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was so deep she could hear her own breath. Then came the applause, slow at first, then louder, rising like a wave. Guests stood on their feet, clapping and cheering. She looked up, eyes wide, hands still trembling. She had never felt anything like it. The manager smiled proudly from across the room. Some of her co-workers had tears in their eyes. Even the ones who used to tease her looked stunned. For the first time in years, she realized she hadn't lost her dream after all. It had just been waiting for her to be brave enough to play again, and that night she didn't feel like a waitress anymore. She felt like herself again. When the applause finally faded, she sat still for a few seconds, her heart racing so fast she could hardly breathe. It felt like a dream, too beautiful to be real. The grand hall that once made her nervous now felt small, quiet, and almost gentle. The guests who once looked past her now stared with admiration. Some even clapped again as she stood up and bowed slightly, her hands trembling. The manager walked toward her, his face glowing with pride. "You did it," he said softly. "That was beyond anything we expected." She smiled shyly, still dazed by what had just happened. As she stepped away from the piano, people began to approach her, guests dressed in elegant clothes holding glasses of champagne. They wanted to know who she was, where she had learned to play like that, and why they had never seen her perform before. She answered their questions humbly, her voice soft and polite. "I used to play," she explained, "but I stopped for a while." "I'm just a waitress here," a woman gasped. "Just a waitress? My dear, you're a true musician." A man beside her nodded. "You've got something rare. You don't just play, you feel it. That's what makes the difference." Their words filled her with warmth but also disbelief. She had spent so long blending into the background that hearing praise like this felt almost strange. Still deep down, a quiet happiness spread through her chest. For once, she wasn't invisible. As the night went on, guests continued to talk about her performance. Even those who had been busy networking and laughing stopped to compliment her. One of the hotel's senior managers from another branch shook her hand. "You reminded everyone tonight what true art sounds like," he said. Later that night, when the event was finally over, the staff gathered to clean up. She helped pick up glasses and fold tablecloths as usual, though this time everyone treated her differently. The teasing was gone. Instead, there were smiles and kind words. "You made us proud," one of the waiters said. Another added, "You had everyone in tears, you know that?" She laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was just trying not to make mistakes." When the guests and staff had all left, she stood alone in the quiet hall looking at the grand piano. The lights had dimmed and the room looked peaceful. She walked over and touched the keys gently. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy black surface. She whispered to herself, "I did it. It wasn't just about the performance. It was about finding herself again, remembering who she was before life forced her to let go of her dreams. The next morning she arrived at work expecting things to go back to normal. She put on her apron and started setting tables. But it didn't take long to realize nothing was the same anymore. Guests began asking for her by name. "Is the pianist here tonight?" they would ask. "Please tell her to play again." Some even brought flowers or small gifts, leaving them near the piano. The manager noticed, of course. "Looks like you've become a celebrity," he teased gently. But he was proud. He told her she could continue playing every evening, and that the hotel wanted to feature her as their official in-house pianist for the rest of the season. Her heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll do my best." Over the following weeks, she played every night. Each performance was different, sometimes soft and emotional, other times lively and full of energy. She began to experiment again, creating her own versions of songs and blending classical pieces with modern tunes. Guests loved it. The restaurant was busier than ever. People started filming her performances on their phones, posting them online. Within days, her name spread on social media. Short clips of the waitress pianist went viral. Thousands of people shared the videos, amazed by her talent and humility. But with the attention came pressure. The hotel started receiving calls from reporters and local event organizers, asking to book her for special shows. She felt nervous, unsure if she was ready for such a big step. Music had always been personal to her. It was something she did for herself, not for fame. One evening, while she was preparing for dinner service, a guest asked to meet her. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a soft voice. "I was at the gala," he said. "Your performance reminded me of my daughter. She's studying at the conservatory downtown." She smiled politely. "That's wonderful. I used to study there too." The man tilted his head. "You did? You must have been one of the best students. Would you ever consider returning?" Her smile faded a little. "I had to leave," she said quietly. "Family reasons." He nodded in understanding. "Sometimes life makes us pause our dreams. But it doesn't mean they're gone forever." His words stayed with her. That night, when she got home, she sat by her small window and thought about everything. The music, the applause, the people, it was all happening so fast. She had once believed her chance was over, but now doors she never imagined were opening again. A few days later, she received an envelope from the hotel office. Inside was a handwritten letter from the charity organization that hosted the gala. They thanked her for her unforgettable performance and invited her to play at their next event, this time as a featured artist. She couldn't believe it. Her hands shook as she read the words again. It wasn't just an invitation, it was an opportunity. Still, she felt torn. Part of her wanted to accept, to finally live the dream she had buried. But another part of her feared losing the simple, peaceful life she had built. The restaurant had become like a home to her. The staff were like family. What if she wasn't ready for the world outside these walls? The following evening, as she played her usual set, she noticed the manager standing quietly near the entrance listening. After she finished, he approached her. "I heard about the invitation," he said. She nodded. "I don't know if I should go." He looked at her for a moment, then said gently, "You were meant for more than this place. Don't let fear stop you." His words touched her deeply. She realized he was right. For too long she had lived safely in the background, afraid to take risks, but maybe this was her moment to step forward. That night, after the last guest left, she stayed behind again. The piano sat under the soft glow of the chandelier, waiting. She played quietly, letting the music guide her thoughts. Each note seemed to whisper encouragement. The next morning, she wrote a short reply to the invitation. She accepted. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. The charity event was to be held at a grand theater, much larger than the hotel. She practiced for hours each day, selecting pieces that spoke to her heart. The staff supported her in every way they could, covering her shifts, cheering her on, bringing her tea during breaks. The night before the event, she couldn't sleep. She thought about her mother, who had always believed in her talent. She wished she could see this moment. She also thought about the first day she came to the restaurant, tired and scared, with no idea her life would take this turn. When morning came, she looked in the mirror and took a deep breath. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician again. On the day of the event, the theater was full. The crowd buzzed with excitement, many recognizing her from the viral videos. She walked onto the stage wearing a simple dress, her hands slightly shaking. The piano stood at the center, gleaming under the lights. As she sat down, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Play from your heart." The first note rang out, soft but clear. The music flowed effortlessly like a story unfolding. It carried every emotion she had ever felt, every struggle, every quiet victory. The audience listened in complete silence, moved by the sincerity in her performance. By the time she finished, the entire theater was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Some people had tears in their eyes. She stood up slowly, overwhelmed, and bowed. It was in that moment she realized something important. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about connection. Her music had reached people's hearts. And that, more than anything, was what she had always wanted. When she walked off the stage, her hands were still shaking. The sound of the applause echoed in her ears long after it stopped. People were standing, clapping, some even shouting her name. She had never imagined anything like that could happen to her. For a moment, she stood behind the curtain, trying to take it all in. It felt unreal, like something from a dream she didn't dare to dream anymore. A woman from the organizing committee rushed over with a big smile. "That was extraordinary," she said, almost breathless. "You moved everyone in the room. We've never had a performance that emotional." The young woman thanked her softly, her voice trembling. She didn't know what to say. Compliments like that still felt strange. Backstage, other performers and staff clapped for her as she passed by. Some asked for pictures, others simply smiled and congratulated her, but she barely heard them. Her mind was still on the piano, on the way her fingers had moved without thought, like they had found their way home. Later that night, when she stepped outside, the cool air hit her face. She looked up at the night sky and smiled. For years she had wondered if she would ever play again, not just for herself, but for others. Now she knew the answer. When she returned to the hotel the next day, the staff welcomed her like a hero. They had all watched her performance online, cheering from their phones. Even the guests congratulated her. It felt like everyone knew. The manager called her into his office. On the desk was a newspaper with a photo of her sitting at the piano under the headline, "Waitress Pianist Captures Hearts at Charity Event." She stared at it, her eyes wide. I didn't know they'd write about it," she said quietly. He smiled. "The whole city knows about it now. You've become an inspiration. People are talking about your story, how you gave up your dream and found it again. It's giving hope to others." She didn't know how to react. Fame had never been her goal. She had only wanted to play. Still, the idea that her story could make someone else believe in themselves made her heart full. The days that followed were busy. Reporters came to the restaurant, politely asking for interviews. Local music teachers sent her letters inviting her to visit their schools. Some even offered to help her start performing full-time. At first she hesitated. The restaurant had become her safe place. It was where she had rebuilt herself piece by piece. But as more opportunities came, she began to wonder if maybe it was time to step beyond those walls. One evening after dinner service, she sat at the piano alone. The restaurant was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She rested her hands on the keys but didn't play. Instead, she thought about everything: her mother, her past, the fear that once held her back. The manager walked in quietly. "You're thinking again," he said with a soft smile. She looked up. "Just trying to decide what's next." He nodded. "You've done so much already. You've made us proud, but you don't belong just here anymore. You were meant for bigger stages." She smiled faintly. "This place gave me back my music. I'll never forget that." "I know," he said kindly, "but maybe it's time for others to hear it too." His words stayed with her that night. She thought about all the people who had supported her, the staff, the guests, even strangers online. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was holding back out of fear again. A few days later, she got a call from a local concert organizer who had seen her performance at the charity event. He wanted her to headline a small piano concert. Just her and the instrument, no orchestra, no background music. The event was to raise funds for young music students who couldn't afford lessons. Her first reaction was disbelief. "Me, a whole concert?" "Yes," the man replied. "People already admire your story. They want to hear you again. And this concert would mean something. It's not just for fame, it's to help others follow their dreams. She felt her chest tighten. That purpose touched her deeply. "I'll do it," she said. The following weeks were filled with preparation. The concert was scheduled for a small theater, intimate and warm, perfect for the kind of music she played. She spent hours practicing, sometimes at the hotel after closing, sometimes at a local studio offered by a kind supporter. At first, she felt nervous. Each time she sat at the piano, she remembered all the times she doubted herself. But the more she practiced, the stronger she felt. She began creating new arrangements, songs filled with emotion, telling the story of her journey. One evening, as she was practicing at the hotel, a young boy stood near the doorway, watching quietly. When she stopped, he spoke softly. "I want to play like that one day," she smiled. "You can," she said. "You just have to keep trying." He looked unsure. "But we don't have a piano at home." She paused for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook she used for jotting melodies. She tore a page and wrote something down. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "It's a list of places where you can learn for free. Don't give up, okay?" The boy nodded, his eyes shining. "Thank you." After he left, she sat quietly thinking. It wasn't the applause or fame that mattered most. It was how her music could touch someone else's life, even in small ways. When the day of the concert arrived, the theater was filled. People from all walks of life came. Students, families, workers, even some of the guests from the hotel. Her co-workers sat in the front row, waving excitedly when they saw her appear on stage. The lights dimmed and she took her seat at the piano. The room went silent. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart steady itself. Then she began to play. The music started softly, telling the story of her quiet beginnings, the long nights working, the loneliness, the hidden dreams. As the tempo rose, it carried the feeling of rediscovery. The moment she touched the piano again, the sound of hope returning. People listened in silence, their eyes fixed on her. Each note carried emotion, honesty, and warmth. It wasn't just skill they heard. It was her heart speaking. By the time she reached the final piece, she played with tears in her eyes. It was a melody she had written herself, dedicated to her mother. Every note felt like a whisper of gratitude, for love, for sacrifice, for the strength to keep going. When the last note faded, the room was still. Then once again came the applause, long, powerful, full of emotion. She stood up, bowing deeply, overwhelmed with joy and disbelief. She could see people wiping tears from their eyes. The young boy she had met earlier was in the front row, clapping with all his heart. After the concert, people gathered to thank her. Some said her story gave them courage to chase their own dreams. Others simply wanted to tell her how her music made them feel understood. That night, when she finally returned home, she sat by the window again, holding the small notebook she always carried. She flipped through the pages filled with melodies and unfinished songs. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid to dream bigger. She realized something important. Her journey wasn't just about returning to music. It was about finding her voice, her purpose. Music had brought her back to life, and now it was her turn to give that life to others. The next morning, she received a message from the charity organization. They wanted to make her an ambassador for their upcoming youth program, teaching music to children from struggling families. She read the message twice, hardly believing it. Tears welled up in her eyes again. That day, she went to the restaurant one last time, not as a worker, but to say goodbye. The staff hugged her tightly, proud yet emotional. The manager smiled and said, "Go make the world hear what we already know. You were born to play." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't." Before leaving, she walked to the piano one last time. She placed her hand on the keys, pressed a soft note, and whispered, "Thank you." As she stepped outside into the morning sunlight, she felt the same peace she used to feel when she played as a child. The world suddenly seemed open and full of possibilities. Her story had started in a restaurant surrounded by clinking glasses and laughter. Now it was moving to concert halls, classrooms, and hearts she hadn't yet met. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She would keep playing, not for applause or fame, but for the quiet, beautiful power of music to heal and inspire. And that was enough. The months that followed were unlike anything she had experienced before. Her life changed in ways she never expected. From being a quiet waitress in a corner restaurant, she had now become a name people spoke with admiration. Her music had reached hearts, and her story had inspired many. But even with all the attention, she remained humble. She still woke up early, made her own tea, and spent long hours practicing. She often said to herself, "If I stop being honest in my music, then I stop being me." Those words kept her grounded. Her first role as ambassador for the youth music program began with a visit to a small school outside the city. The place was simple: peeling walls, old benches, and a piano that looked like it had seen decades of use. Yet the children there had eyes full of curiosity and hope. When she entered the room, they clapped excitedly, whispering to each other. Many of them had only seen her performance online. To them, she was someone who had achieved something impossible. But she didn't walk in like a celebrity. She walked in with a soft smile and calm grace, just as she had always been. She started by sitting beside the piano and asking, "Who here loves music?" Every hand went up. "Who here has ever been told you can't do something?" She continued. Many hands stayed up. She smiled gently. "Then I know how you feel. I was told the same once. But I learned that what others think doesn't matter as much as what you believe about yourself." Then she began to play. The sound filled the small classroom like sunlight entering through a dusty window. The children listened in silence, their eyes wide, their hearts quiet. It wasn't just music. They could feel her story in every note. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. One little girl came forward shyly and said, "I want to play like you one day." She reached out, lifted the girl's hand, and placed it on the piano keys. "Then start here," she said softly. "This piano doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It listens to your heart." That visit marked the beginning of something bigger. She began traveling to different schools, community centers, and orphanages, sharing her story and teaching basic piano lessons. Everywhere she went, children gathered around her, drawn by the warmth in her music and the kindness in her words. Sometimes she stayed late after the sessions, helping a student who wanted to practice a little longer, or fixing a broken key with whatever tools were available. She didn't see herself as a teacher. She saw herself as someone giving back what life had once given her, a second chance. Meanwhile, her popularity continued to grow. Invitations started coming from abroad, music festivals, charity concerts, and art events. But she didn't accept all of them. She carefully chose the ones that had meaning. Fame didn't tempt her. Purpose did. One day, she received an email from a major cultural organization. They were hosting an international music event and wanted her to represent her country. It was an opportunity most musicians dreamed of. The stage was grand and the audience would be from around the world. She hesitated for a few days before replying. She wanted to make sure she was ready, not in terms of skill, but emotionally. Performing on such a big stage meant sharing her story with people who didn't know her struggles. But then she remembered the young girl from the school and the words she had spoken to her. "This piano listens to your heart." She finally replied with one line, "Yes, I'll do it." The preparation for the event was intense. The organizers arranged interviews, photo sessions, and rehearsals. But despite the pressure, she stayed calm. She practiced every morning before sunrise when the world was quiet and her thoughts were clear. During rehearsals, the event's director noticed something special about her. "You don't play like the others," he said once. "You play as if every note has a memory." She smiled softly. Maybe it does. The night of the event arrived. The stage was grander than anything she had ever seen. Lights shone down like stars, and the hall was filled with people in elegant clothes, whispering with excitement. Cameras flashed, recording every moment. Backstage, she sat alone for a few minutes, breathing slowly. She closed her eyes and imagined her mother's face. She could almost hear her voice saying, "Play from your heart, my child." That memory gave her strength. When her name was announced, she stepped out onto the stage. The applause was polite but curious. Most people didn't know her yet. She bowed slightly and sat down at the piano. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then she began. The melody started gentle, flowing like water. It was her own composition, one she had written to tell her story without words. As the music grew, it carried the pain of her past, the strength of her survival, and the joy of rediscovery. People listened with growing attention. The sound seemed to fill not just the room but their hearts. Some closed their eyes. Some leaned forward, lost in the music. When she reached the middle of the piece, she felt tears gathering in her eyes, but she didn't stop. Her fingers moved with purpose, with truth. She wasn't performing anymore. She was simply telling her story through the piano, one note at a time. By the time she finished, the hall was silent. Then slowly, applause began, soft at first, then louder and louder until the whole place was on its feet. It was not the kind of applause that came from excitement. It came from being deeply moved. She stood, bowed deeply, and smiled with quiet gratitude. After the performance, people came up to her, wanting to shake her hand, to tell her how her music had touched them. Some said they cried during her piece. Others said they saw parts of their own lives in her sound. That night, her performance went viral online. Clips of her playing spread across social media, reaching millions. People wrote comments like, "This is what real music sounds like," and "She plays from the soul." But for her, the greatest joy came from an email she received the next morning. It was from a small-town teacher who wrote, "Because of your story, we have started a piano club for children who couldn't afford lessons. Thank you for inspiring us." She sat there, reading the message over and over, tears filling her eyes again. That simple note meant more than any trophy or recognition. In the following weeks, she continued working with the youth program, balancing her growing career with her commitment to help others. She started a small scholarship fund, using part of her earnings to provide instruments and lessons to talented children who needed support. Whenever someone asked her about success, she always gave the same answer. It's not about being known. It's about being useful. She began writing new music again, pieces inspired by the children she met, the places she visited, and the emotions that never left her heart. Each melody told a story, not of fame or glory, but of kindness, resilience, and hope. One afternoon, as she sat by the window composing, the sun fell softly across the keys. The sound of laughter came from the street below, children playing, chasing each other. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Her journey had not been easy, but it had shaped her into someone she could finally be proud of. She was no longer the uncertain waitress afraid to touch the piano. She was a woman who had faced her fears and found beauty in her pain. Still, she knew her story wasn't over. There was more music to write, more lives to touch, more paths to follow. She didn't know where life would take her next, but she was ready for it. Before closing her notebook that evening, she wrote one sentence on a blank page. "The music that saved me will now save others." As the light faded, she touched the piano once more, letting a few quiet notes fill the air. They sounded like a promise to never stop playing, never stop believing, and never stop giving. That was who she had become. And deep down, she knew something beautiful was waiting ahead, something even her heart couldn't yet imagine. Life had taken a turn she never could have imagined. From the quiet corner of a bustling restaurant, she had stepped into a world filled with music, applause, and people who valued her talent. But despite all the recognition, she remained humble, focused, and most importantly, true to herself. She had traveled to new cities, performed in beautiful concert halls, and met people who loved music as much as she did. Each performance brought its own challenges, but also a deep satisfaction she had never felt before. She realized that music wasn't just about skill, it was about heart. It was about speaking to people without words, connecting with them in a way nothing else could. Her mornings often began the same way. She would wake before sunrise, make herself a cup of tea, and sit at the piano for quiet practice. These were the moments she treasured most, when no one was watching, when the world was still, and when she could feel the music flow freely through her fingers. Some days, she would look out of her window and think about how far she had come. She remembered the long nights at the restaurant, carrying trays, wiping tables, and pretending the piano was just a background for her life. She remembered the teasing, the doubts, and the fear that held her back. And she remembered the moment she dared to play again, the first note that made everything feel alive once more. It had not been easy. There were moments of doubt, times when she wondered if she was ready for the attention and responsibility that came with her growing reputation. But each time she reminded herself why she started, to play from her heart, to connect with people, to share the gift she had been given. Her work with the youth program continued to be a source of joy and grounding. She visited schools, community centers, and small music clubs, teaching children who had never had the chance to play an instrument. She watched their faces light up when they mastered a new melody, their eyes sparkling with pride and excitement. One day, a boy of about 10 approached her after a lesson. He was shy, holding a small notebook of notes he had written himself. I want to compose music like you someday," he said softly. She smiled, kneeling down to his level. "Then start now," she said. "Every note you write tells a story. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are part of the music." He nodded, and she watched him run to the piano with renewed confidence. Seeing him reminded her why she did what she did. Fame, awards, and applause were wonderful, but nothing compared to helping someone discover their own voice. Her own music began to reflect these experiences. She wrote pieces inspired by the children she taught, the stories she heard, and the lives she touched. Every composition carried emotion, vulnerability, and hope. It was music that could speak to anyone, anywhere, without explanation. Back at the hotel where her journey had started, she returned occasionally to play for special events. The staff welcomed her warmly, still amazed at how far she had come. She always remembered the manager who had believed in her when she doubted herself. "You've become more than I could have imagined," he said one evening, "and yet you're still the same person we met years ago." "That's rare," she smiled softly. "I just play what I feel," she said. "The rest doesn't matter." Over time, her life became a balance between performing for large audiences and giving her time to teach and inspire young musicians. She realized that her purpose was not just to perform, but to nurture the love of music in others. Each child she taught, each note she played, was a reminder of where she had come from and why she had started this journey. One evening, after returning from an international music festival, she sat by her piano reflecting on everything that had happened. She remembered the first time she had dared to play in the restaurant, the fear and uncertainty she had felt. She remembered the applause at the charity gala, the viral videos, and the small classrooms where she taught children who had never held a piano before. Her heart felt full. She realized that every step, every struggle, and every choice had led her to this point. She had learned that courage was not about being fearless, but about moving forward despite fear. And she had learned that music, above all, was a bridge between people, between hearts, and between dreams and reality. That night, she began to play a piece she had been composing for months. It was soft at first, tender and reflective. Each note carried gratitude for her past, her present, and the possibilities of the future. As the music grew, it spoke of resilience, hope, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. She played without pause, fully immersed in the sound and emotion. The music became a story, the story of a young woman who had once been overlooked, who had faced fear, who had dared to dream again. And through every key, she shared not just her talent, but her journey. When the last note faded into the night, she sat quietly for a moment, listening to the echoes of her own music. She felt a calm sense of completion, knowing that her story had reached not only others, but also herself. She had grown, healed, and discovered her true purpose. As she stood to leave, her phone buzzed. A message appeared from one of the schools she had visited weeks ago. "Because of you, our students have started their first recital. Thank you for inspiring them to believe in themselves." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of deep, quiet joy. She realized that her life had become a cycle of giving and receiving, teaching and learning, playing and inspiring. The music that had once been a refuge for her was now a light for others. Days turned into months, and her influence continued to grow. She performed at larger concerts, her name becoming known far beyond the city. She received invitations to international events, yet she carefully chose those that had meaning. Every performance was an opportunity to connect, to share, and to inspire. Still, she remained grounded. She returned often to the places where her journey began, the restaurant, the local schools, and the small music clubs. There she remembered who she was and why she had started. She remembered the fear, the struggle, and the quiet determination that had brought her here. One afternoon, while visiting a school in a rural area, a young girl approached her with a timid smile. "I heard your story," she said softly. "You were once a waitress, and now you play for the world. Can I be like you someday?" She knelt beside her and took her hand. "Yes," she said warmly. "If you work hard and follow your heart, you can be anything you want to be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl's eyes sparkled with hope, and in that moment the young woman realized that her story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever dreamed, struggled, and dared to continue. Even as her life became busier, she made sure to keep her music personal and honest. She avoided distractions that could pull her away from the purpose she had found. Fame, wealth, and recognition were pleasant, but they were never her true goal. Her goal was always to touch hearts, inspire others, and create beauty in the world. Years passed, and her life was full of music, joy, and meaning. She had become a symbol of hope for many, a living proof that talent, courage, and perseverance could overcome obstacles. Yet she remained humble, always remembering the young waitress who had once stood quietly in the corner of a restaurant, longing to play. One evening, as she played a quiet melody at home, she paused and listened to the sound. Each note reminded her of the path she had walked, the long shifts, the fear, the first daring notes in the restaurant, the applause, the children she had inspired, and the countless hearts she had touched. She realized that life had given her something precious, a second chance to live fully, to love deeply, and to share her gift with the world. As she pressed the last key, the room fell silent. For a moment, she sat quietly, feeling the weight of her journey and the joy of her accomplishments. She smiled, knowing that every struggle had led to this peace, every doubt had led to growth, and every note had led to connection. She rose from the piano and walked to the window. The night sky stretched endlessly before her, full of possibilities. She knew her journey would continue, that there would be new challenges, new stages, and new hearts to touch. But she also knew that she had found something eternal, her music, her purpose, and her voice. And as she looked out at the world, she whispered softly to herself, "I will keep playing. For me and for everyone who needs to hear this music. I will never stop believing, never stop dreaming, and never stop giving." That was her life now, a life full of music, hope, and inspiration. A life that began quietly in a restaurant, but had grown to reach the world. A life proof that courage, talent, and heart could transform even the simplest beginnings into something extraordinary. And so she played on, each note a testament to the journey she had lived and the countless lives she had touched.